everyone, welcome to Good Vibes and Bad Decisions. If you are new, thank you very much for choosing the channel. And if you are one of our sofa addicts like us or true crime buffs, then welcome all the way back. Please click the notification bell so you get notified every time we update a video and subscribe because it really does help you see our videos in your recommended. Okay, guys, I am Quinn and this is my best friend Gypsy.
Hi.
So we are going to bring to you another true crime showstopper. And I know you think, like, where do you find all this stuff? How do you get it? We're just magic, okay? We're like wizards. That's how we do it, okay? Sprinkle the little wizard dust and up pops another murder for you because you love it and we love telling you. So I'm going to hand you over to my whole black cat there and we're going to get into it. So, da 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 da.
So today we're going to be talking about Richard Ramirez, aka the Night Stalker. Before we begin, take a moment and look around the room. Check the locks, the windows, the hallway outside your bedroom door, because in the summer of 1985, millions of Californians did exactly that every single night. And still, it wasn't enough. Imagine waking up at 2 a.m. The house is silent. The only sound is the gentle hum of a ceiling fan turning overhead. Then you hear something, a footstep, soft, deliberate, inside your home. You sit up, your heart begins to race. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's the house settling. Maybe it's your imagination. But then you hear it again, closer this time. And suddenly you're faced with a terrifying realization. You're not alone. Someone is in the room with you. Someone has been watching. Someone has been waiting. And by the time you see him,
It's already too late. Your heartbeat is slow and heavy. For 14 months, a predator stalked California under the cover of darkness. He didn't follow a pattern. He didn't choose one type of victim. Young women, elderly couples, and families. He moved through neighborhoods like a ghost, slipping through unlocked windows, scaling fences, and entering homes as entire communities slept. No one knew where he would strike next. No one knew who he would choose. And perhaps, most frightening of all, no one knew his name. Newspapers called him the Night Stalker, the boogeyman of the 1980s, a living nightmare who transformed ordinary bedrooms into crime scenes and turned an entire state into prisoners of fear. Listen quietly. Every morning brought another headline, another family shattered, another neighborhood asking the same desperate question: who is he? Police chased shadows, investigators worked around the clock, the public armed themselves, they installed locks, bought guard dogs, and slept with lights on. Yet somehow, the killer kept coming. This is not a story about a monster. Monsters being in folklore. This is a story of a man, a real man who walked among ordinary people, a man whose path towards violence began years before California ever learned to fear him, a man who would become one of the most notorious serial killers in American history. And this
is the story of how an entire city hunted him back. And tonight, we're stepping into the shadows to uncover the chilling true story of Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. Los Angeles, summer. The city glowed beneath palm trees and neon lights. Freeways pulsed with headlights. Radios played pop hits. Families locked their doors and went to sleep believing that the home was the one place in the world where they were safe. But for more than a year, something moved through the darkness. Not a figure in a horror movie, not a monster from urban legend, a real man. A man who walked through unlocked windows and shattered doors. A killer who chose his victims seemingly at random. Young or old, rich or poor, men, women, couples, it didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the opportunity. And before California would finally know his name, newspapers gave him another one, the Night Stalker.
This is the story of Richard Ramirez, the story of the people whose lives he stole, the investigation that nearly failed to stop him, and the extraordinary chain of events that finally brought one of America's most infamous serial killers to justice. Richard Ramirez was born Ricardo Leyva Munoz Ramirez on February 29, 1960, in El Paso, Texas. From the beginning, his life was marked by instability and violence. Accounts of his childhood describe a household where abuse and fear they were familiar realities. His father was known to be physically abusive, and Richard reportedly suffered head injuries during childhood. Later accounts also describe him developing an interest in drugs at a very young age. But one influence would become particularly significant: his cousin Miguel. Miguel was a Vietnam War veteran struggling with psychological trauma, and Ramirez idolized him. The cousin allegedly shared graphic stories about violence in Vietnam and showed the young teenager disturbing photographs connected to wartime atrocities. Those images left a deep mark on Ramirez. Then came an event that seemed almost unbelievable.
When Richard was around 15 years old, he witnessed Miguel shoot and kill his wife during an argument. According to historical accounts, Ramirez was present when it happened. Imagine that for a moment. A teenager, already surrounded by violence, already fascinated by darkness, now witnessing a murder committed by someone he admired. Experts would later debate how much these experiences contributed to his future crimes. But what cannot be debated is what happened next. As Ramirez entered adulthood, he became increasingly involved in drugs, theft, and burglary. Eventually, he left Texas and migrated to California. There, he drifted through cheap hotels, burglarized homes, and supported himself through crime. No one knew it then, but a predator was already taking shape.
By 1984, Los Angeles was growing, sprawling, and busy. Millions of people, millions of bedrooms, millions of opportunities. Ramirez discovered something terrifyingly simple. Most people never expected evil to walk through a window at 2 in the morning. His attacks were characterized by unpredictability. There was no clear victim profile, no single age group, no consistent neighborhood. Sometimes he used a handgun, other times a knife, a tire iron, a hammer, whatever was available. The randomness became one of the investigation's greatest challenges. Detectives often rely on patterns. Serial offenders frequently target similar victims. They use similar methods, or they operate within defined territories. Ramirez did none of those things consistently.
Which meant detectives weren't simply hunting a killer, they were hunting chaos. In March 1985, Southern California's fear began intensifying. A series of horrifying attacks appeared connected. Victims were attacked inside their homes. Some survived long enough to provide descriptions, others did not. The attacks seemed to suggest one brutal fact: someone was entering homes while people slept. Residents began checking locks repeatedly before bed. Hardware stores sold out of alarms and security devices. Neighborhood watch groups expanded. Parents stayed awake late into the night. The fear wasn't confined to one community, it spread. And because the attacks appeared random, nobody felt safe.
What terrified Californians most was not simply the violence, it was the absence of logic. Many killers chose specific victims, and Ramirez often did not. An elderly woman could be targeted one night, and a young couple another. Someone wealthy, someone with almost nothing. The randomness created the feeling that anyone could be next. When discussing serial killers, there's always a danger, the danger of focusing so much on the perpetrator that the victims become background characters. And they weren't. They they were people.
Parents, grandparents, spouses, friends, neighbors. Many were asleep when their lives changed forever. Some had spent decades building families and homes. Others were still young with entire futures ahead of them. Richard Ramirez would eventually be connected to at least 15 murders, alongside numerous assaults, burglaries, rapes, and attempted murders.
His victims came from vastly different backgrounds. That diversity was exactly why the fear became so powerful. There was no obvious way to avoid becoming a target. No warning, no common thread, just the night and the possibility that a stranger might already be standing inside your house.
The investigation became one of the largest manhunts California had ever seen. Detectives were under relentless pressure. News coverage intensified, public fear intensified, and still the attacks continued. One of the biggest challenges was linking the crimes together. Different weapons, different circumstances, different victim profiles, yet experienced investigators began identifying similarities.
Evidence recovered from the crime scenes, witness descriptions, behavioural patterns. Over time, detectives became increasingly convinced that a single offender was responsible. Media outlets began giving the unknown assailant names: the Valley Intruder, the Walk-in Killer. Eventually, that name would become infamous: the Night Stalker. But a nickname wasn't an arrest. The killings continued, and each new crime added pressure on the investigators.
Every major investigation has a moment, a tiny detail, a missed clue, a fortunate accident, sometimes something that changes everything. For the Night Stalker case, breakthroughs emerged through forensic evidence and investigative work that gradually narrowed the search towards Richard Ramirez. Authorities were eventually able to identify him as their primary suspect and publicly release his name and image.
And once his face became public, the dynamic changed instantly. You see, before Ramirez had been hunting California, now California was hunting Ramirez. Newspapers carried his photograph, television broadcasters displayed his face. The man who had hidden in darkness suddenly became recognizable. It was a devastating development for him.
Because unlike earlier victims, the public now knew exactly who they were looking for. August 31st, 1985. Richard Ramirez had no idea his life was about to change forever. One account says he entered a convenience store and discovered his own face staring back at him from newspapers. Authorities had just released his photograph. Panic set in. He fled. People recognized him. Word spread quickly.
Residents who had spent months living in fear suddenly realized the Night Stalker was standing in their neighborhood. Ramirez attempted to escape, But then something extraordinary happened. Ordinary citizens intervened. Residents pursued him through East Los Angeles. An angry crowd formed.
The chase intensified. Multiple reports describe Ramirez being physically restrained and beaten by members of the public who recognized him as the suspected Night Stalker. By the time police arrived, the man who had terrorized California for more than a year was no longer the hunter. He was the captive.
Richard Ramirez was arrested on August 31st, 1985. The reign of terror was over. If the crimes shocked the public, the trial cemented Ramirez's place in criminal history. The proceedings attracted enormous media attention. Family of victims attended. Reporters packed courtrooms. The public followed every development.
Prosecutors assembled evidence connecting Ramirez to murder, sexual assault, burglary, and attempted murder. Years after his arrest, a jury found him guilty. In 1989, Richard Ramirez was convicted on multiple counts, including numerous murders, and was sentenced to death. Yet even after the conviction, public fascination with the case persisted, partly because of the brutality, partly because of the randomness, and partly because people struggled to understand how one individual could generate so much fear across an entire state.
Richard Ramirez spent the remainder of his life in prison. He died in 2013 whilst awaiting execution. But the story of the Night Stalker refuses to disappear. Not because of him, because of what society learned. The case demonstrated how vulnerable people feel when the violence appears completely random. It showed how difficult investigations became when offenders refused to follow predictable patterns. And it revealed something remarkable about human nature.
For more than a year, California lived in fear. Then, on a summer day in 1985, ordinary people recognized the face from the news and refused to let him escape. The killer who had stalked the night was finally forced into the light. And somewhere tonight, in thousands of homes across California, families lock their doors before bed without ever thinking about the fear that once gripped an entire state.
But in the history of true crime, the shadow of the Night Stalker remains, a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters, they're not supernatural at all, they're human. When we tell stories like this, it's easy to become consumed by the darkness, the killer, the investigation, the headlines, and the fear. But long after the newspapers stop printing and the documentaries stop filming, the people left carrying the real weight of the story are often the families.
The mothers who lost children, the children who lost parents, the husbands and wives who woke one day to discover that the life they knew had been shattered beyond repair. For them, the story never truly ends. A crime of this magnitude doesn't simply take a life, it changes generations. The empty chair at family dinners remains empty. The photographs grow older, but the person in them never does. Birthdays arrive, weddings happen, grandchildren are born, and somewhere in each of those moments is a silent reminder of someone who should have been there but isn't.
That is the true legacy of violence. It echoes through family trees, it travels through decades, it leaves scars that are often invisible to everyone except those forced to carry them. Throughout this episode, we've left out many details of Richard Ramirez's crimes, and not because they're not important, not because they weren't horrific, but because this story was never meant to be a catalogue of violence. Instead, we focused on something else, a moment in time.
A terrifying chapter in California's history when millions of people became afraid of the one place that they should have felt safest, their own homes. Bedrooms became places of anxiety. Every creak of a floorboard became a question. Every open window became a threat. Every night carried uncertainty. And yet, this story is also about something remarkable.
It's about what happened when ordinary people refused to live in fear forever. When a community that had spent months wondering who the Night Stalker was finally looked him in the eye. The same California residents who had checked their locks every night, the same people who slept with the lights on, the same families who had watched the news with growing dread. They were the ones who helped bring terror to an end.
In a strange way, the story of the Night Stalker is not a story about fear. It's a story about a community taking back its streets, its homes, and its sense of safety. And before
Okay.
we leave tonight, we want to say something directly to the victims, because every true crime story risks forgetting the people at its heart.
You were more than a case number, more than a headline, more than a chapter in a history book. You were people who laughed, loved, worried, dreamed, and mattered. Your lives were not defined by how they ended, they were defined by how they were lived.
And while the world may remember the name of the man who harmed you, there are countless people who choose instead to remember your courage, your humanity, and the families who continue carrying your memory forward. That remembrance is its own kind of victory, because evil may steal a life, but it doesn't get the final word. Love does, memory does, family does.
As we end this episode, the night outside your window is probably peaceful. Most nights are. The darkness itself is not something to fear, but history teaches us an important lesson.
Lock the door, check on the people you love, look out for your neighbours, and never take safety for granted. Because sometimes the most dangerous things don't arrive with a warning. Sometimes they move silently through the darkness while the rest of the world sleeps.
Until next time, stay aware and stay safe. And when the house settles and you hear an unexpected sound in the middle of the night, make sure it's only the wind. I think that story is one that every woman should know. I
Mm-hmm.
feel, you know, these victims were so varied. I understand and I sympathise with the detectives who were constantly playing catch up with this investigation.
Yeah,
You, you,
absolutely.
you know a lot about behavior. You know a lot about human behavior, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, sorry, you actually teach me a lot of things about. You pay attention to the words people say and why they choose those words, and for someone with a bit of knowledge to be looking in on that, like, is the his victim profiles, which are so over the scale, is that something that blows you away when you look at this?
To some degree, yeah, because on the one hand, he is deemed as a serial killer, but to
Hmm.
my mind, he wasn't so much a planned serial killer in the way that we traditionally know serial killers to be. They
Yeah,
plan their victims,
yeah.
and they have a victim profile. For me, Richard Ramirez was an opportunist,
Hmm.
and his victims were chosen by whatever house he happened to be nearest at the time.
That almost makes it impossible to try and keep any community safe or keep
Yeah,
anybody
it
in
makes it
in
even scarier, I think, because
yeah.
anyone is potentially a victim.
And
Um,
these women, these people would be walking down the street looking at every man thinking, is it you, is it you, is it you?
mhm. Yeah, and
That's
let's be
really
fair.
frightening.
Let's be fair. We don't know. It could have been a woman,
Yeah,
you know, and
yeah,
that kind of
definitely.
uncertainty and that kind of difference between victimology and the methods of attack as well were again opportunistic. They were whatever came to hand.
Yeah, the weapons of choice were not actually, it was whatever was closest to him at the time. I
Yeah.
think that, that also, not only did it make it hard for the investigators to be able to track him down and try and build a profile on him, but it actually made it harder for the people in the communities to be able to decide who was most at risk and then who to keep safe and then what to have in your house. Because
Yeah,
I think, you know, as a woman, I think I would go around my house and put some things away just in case. And it really
yeah,
does
you would
play on your
literally get a
mind.
lockbox and put anything that could possibly kill you in a lockbox. Let's be
Yeah,
fair,
yeah,
it's
absolutely.
immediately.
That's what I would do. And I think that, and I'm going to go a little bit into psych just for a minute because it does
Hmm.
interest me. Um, Richard Ramirez raped these ladies, right?
Hmm.
Am I right? Yeah. So how,
Yeah.
right, for him, right, in his shoes, usually when we have a chat about serial offenders and it's of this nature, usually they do have the pardon me, the one thing that they find the attraction to, and a lot of the time it's they bear a resemblance to a certain person in life, a mother, an aunt, a grandmother,
Hmm.
an ex, or whatever it is, right? And that is what initially, when you break it down and you be really honest about it, that is what turns them on. That is the kink that they
Yeah,
have,
in
and
a
that's
lot of cases. In some cases, it's not the kind of the looks of the person, it's the age, it's the innocence. It's a
hmm
very it can be varied, but it always ties back to something, almost always ties back to something
yeah.
that's happened to them in their past, or an orientation. And I hate using the word orientation when it comes to
I
this.
know, but we know what you mean though, and we know how you're using it. But my question is, you know, what was his? Because he literally was he, as a rapist would have to be attracted to the people because men have to have attraction for certain things to work. So how was he able to find the attraction in such a varied range of victims? And this is not me calling anybody unattractive or anything like that. Please understand that I'm coming to this from a psychological point of view, and I'm asking someone who is qualified about this a question because for me, I've known about this case for a long time, and you hear about serial offenders who do commit these kinds of crimes, and they have the
Mhm.
one thing, and they have that. How was he able to part that over all age ranges, sizes, hair colors, body types, all of these
Because
things? He wasn't, do you think it wasn't sexual gratification he was looking for? It
no,
was the act beforehand.
no, I think I don't even think it was that. For him, it was the power and the fear that he instilled in his
And that's
victim.
what it was.
What
Yeah,
what
definitely.
was the thing that aroused him. And
hmm
we know that he didn't actually essay all of his victims.
hmm
So obviously that is dependent on, gender and opportunity as well. Because
Yeah,
we've also got to remember he's breaking into some of these houses, and their husband might not have been home yet from work, or there's
yeah,
a,
yeah, yeah.
there's a million different scenarios that can play out. But I think that personally, for me, having done all the reading I have and everything about Richard Ramirez, I feel like it was the power and the
hmm
fear that he instilled in those victims that
So
that
whoever
aroused
that's
them.
and that's why the victim didn't matter because he was
Yeah,
being aroused by the power and not by the and that makes so much sense to me now you've explained it. That really does
yeah,
because and I'm sure a lot of people who have investigated or researched this case would have the same question, but a lot of people are frightened to ask it. I'm
yeah,
not that person. So I will ask all of the things that I think when I'm reading up on these cases.
yeah,
Now, sometimes I will bring the cases to you, other times, 9 times out of 10, you bring the cases to the table. And I'll do the reading and I'll do all of these things, before we film them. But I do have questions. And I just feel like a lot of people are frightened to ask certain questions because they don't want to be rude or viewed a certain way and this is not what this podcast is about.
I think that it's really healthy to ask questions, because you don't
Yeah,
learn unless you ask a question, you
right,
know?
exactly, exactly. Do you think that, a lot of serial killers and things that we've covered, like you said, you wouldn't put them in that bracket, and I wholesomely agree with you on that. But do you think that you know how we've covered some serial killers who have went dormant for a while and come back, you
Yeah.
know, they've got married. And do you think that Ramirez would have ever been able to put a lid on that if he wasn't caught, or do you think like this is something that would have spiraled
No,
into
I
something huge?
think I think that he would have continued in what he was doing because
Yeah,
he was, and his attacks were escalating, because I don't feel like the first attacks from the Night Stalker case are his first attacks. I don't think they're his first break-ins, because he has a criminal history of burglary
yeah,
anyway. And we don't know what happens in those cases, whether he attacked the
yeah. We
residents
don't.
of those properties. And I feel like that the burglaries and the attacks that were happening in
Hmm.
1985 were an escalation, and I feel like he would have continued, and he probably would have changed location.
Yeah, you know what?
As soon
Yeah,
as the heat starts getting on, he would have moved to a new state or a new city, or
yeah, and just
and he would
started
have,
all over again.
yeah, and he would have continued to stay one step ahead. The thing that broke this case was them discovering who he was,
Hmm.
and the fact that it was the very people that he tortured, that he when I say tortured, I mean tortured in that they feared for their lives and the lives of their loved ones,
Yeah,
and that alone, that in itself is a torture.
yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. As I completely agree
the
with that.
fact that it was those very citizens that actually caught him, that is so gratifying to me. I
Yeah.
feel like they got their power back.
So, Gypsy, do you think, you know, for a second, what do you make of this cousin Miguel, you know, who was showing him all
Hmm.
of the atrocities and things like that from when he was in Vietnam?
Oh,
What do you
definitely
make of
shaped
this?
him.
Is this something you think that did shape him, that actually put
Yeah,
him?
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Hmm.
'Cause if you think about the timeline, um,
Yeah.
at the time when Miguel had finished his service in Vietnam, that would have
Hmm.
been a time when Richard Ramirez was in his formative years. So he's
Yeah.
shaping and molding. What you've got to think of is a child's mind is like plasticine at that age, and any
Okay.
dent that you make in it, it
Yeah.
stays.
Right. 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 Okay. So that's
So
been something that's been a staple.
yeah.
Do you think that Ramirez, do you think he did so? A lot of us that are, you know, we like to be internet sleuths and we like to do all of these things. I'm very
Hmm.
much one of the people as well. But we read a lot about childhood and how they start with like fire and, you know, animal cruelty and, you know, all of these things. Do you think there wasn't much reports of that sort of thing? Do you think that he must have done something like that, it just hasn't been, you know how you think the first victim was not the first victim, right? There
Yeah.
is a gap in information that we have.
I mean,
Do you think that he followed that sort of pattern when he was younger, or do you think that this cousin actually opened up this whole thing for him and this is it?
the cousin will have definitely made this massive impression on him.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that Richard Ramirez struggled in school. We know that he was in trouble consistently in school. And in his young years, he was in trouble consistently. And then to also witness Miguel shooting and killing his wife in
Yeah.
front of him, according to reports, it was in front of Richard Ramirez. And we'll
Mm-hmm.
have seen the adrenaline rush and how Miguel dealt with that after the fact. And you know this Miguel is has been a massive part of shaping Richard Ramirez's personality right through his formative years up until that incident, which, whether you are the perpetrator or the victim, is still a traumatic incident, and it still makes an imprint on your personality, your brain, your emotional your emotional stability. And although he was there and he wasn't the perpetrator or the victim, witnessing something like that firsthand, hearing about it's one thing, right? But
Mm-hmm.
witnessing something like that firsthand,
Completely different.
it's that has to be the moment that everything changed for Richard Ramirez.
So when, you know, we've just told the listeners as well that he suffered a head injury. Do you think
Yeah.
that that had, you know, that teamed with the trauma that he witnessed? do you think that had anything to do with it, or do you think that that's sort of in his defence? There was a head injury. How do you feel like the head injury played into
I
the whole
think
spree?
the head injury definitely played a part.
Mhm.
But obviously, without looking at medical records and everything, I couldn't tell you to what degree. But I do feel like it. Look at it like a potion. Okay,
Yeah.
so on the one hand, you're adding um, a pint of child abuse. You're adding a pint of um, strong male role models who are toxic, and you're adding in female figures like his mother. If his father was as abusive as reports say, then his mother he would have seen as someone who was weak, right?
Yeah.
Because she couldn't protect him. So add
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
in. Add in his views of women, add in his views of other people, add in all of the things that he has seen and witnessed and gone through and the traumas, and um, that is going to bubble into one massive potion
Mhm.
of anger, of hatred, of volatility. And I'm not saying that everyone that goes through trauma, everyone that is abused does this, because that is not the case at all. Um, what I'm saying is, what you're looking at there is a massive pot of poison. And what Miguel did when he shot his wife was he ignited the flame.
Do you think that Ramirez had a successful love life? Do you
Oh,
think that
absolutely not.
he,
Absolutely
no?
not.
Do you
No.
think that he was considered attractive by females around him at the
Yeah,
time?
definitely. I mean, he was an attractive man,
Hmm.
and I know that there was a massive fan base around him and
Yeah. What do you
everything,
make of
and lots
that?
of women wrote to him in jail and things like that because he was a handsome guy. But
What do you make of him
listen,
having his own fan base and women pouring themselves over him and
listen,
writing to him in prison?
that it happens all the time.
Hmm.
Women who have never learned to respect themselves or respect who they are and what they bring to the table. And a lot of these women have issues themselves.
Yeah.
Uh, and they look for validation in people that they see as big and bad and can protect them, right? But what they don't
Yeah. Yeah.
realize
Yeah.
is those people aren't looking to protect them. They're
No,
saying all the right things with
they're
every
looking
killer,
to
with
exploit
every
them.
criminal. They know how to charm their way out into things. They know how to charm their way out of situations. You
Hmm.
know, they learn from a very early age how to manipulate and um, how to manipulate and how to shape people's views of them. I'm going to change. It's never going to happen again. And then you believe them, right? And these women
Yeah.
don't realize that these criminals have a lifetime of experience in manipulation.
Yeah. Over them. What do you think about can you imagine how the families of these victims feel knowing that there's women pouring themselves over the man who took their
I
loved ones away?
honestly, it my mind boggles at the thought of it.
Yeah, I
Because
just couldn't imagine that, Gypsy.
no, and listen, on the one hand, I feel sorry for those women
Yeah,
because they have clearly got really unhealthy views of what relationships are. But
yeah, definitely.
on the other hand, I don't feel sorry for them because they know right from wrong, right? Every
Well,
one of us
that's it,
knows
and
right
they know
from wrong.
what he did. How can
Yeah,
you possibly, fall in love with or show adoration and, infinite affection to someone who assaulted all of these women, all of these people, killed all these people, did all of these horrific things. And you're not only disrespecting yourself, the victims, the families around the victims. Like we said, this did not just affect the people who died and the people who had to then, live without them. This is a generational effect.
yeah,
This is going to affect their families for more generations to come, for decades. And what I think is more insulting and disgusting is that as women, we should be standing together against assault. As women, we should be looking out for one another and we should be able to help keep each other safe. And to know that there's women out there who are writing to a serial rapist and they are literally falling all over him, after everything he's done, it literally, it blows the words right out of my mind. I have
They're
nothing,
taking
no respect
fantasy.
for them.
They're taking fantasy and putting it into reality, and
Yeah.
there is a massive difference. There is a
And I
massive
have
difference.
zero respect for these
Yeah,
ladies. And I hope that if it's a confidence issue, if it's, a personality thing, whatever it is, I hope that they find peace and help and get better. And I always hope that, all women are safe anyway, regardless of, my personal feelings. I would never wish someone to be unsafe. But can I just say to the ladies that were writing to him and that adored him, you know, when you make your bed, you have to lie in it,
yeah,
unfortunately. And people are going to have opinions. But, we always say go with your heart, trust your gut, do all of these things. I could never back that, regardless with whoever it was. I could just never back that. And this podcast is about having the backs of the families, the victims. And
yeah,
not everyone that died is a victim, and not everybody that is related to the people that did die are victims. The people that lived in fear at that time are victims.
yeah.
The children that grew up living in fear at that time are victims. This goes way, further than anyone has ever reported before.
Yeah.
We've never seen any reports on how the community recovered, the steps they took to
The
try and
the
feel better.
psychological impact on the children that grew up in that environment for an entire year. We
Hmm.
talk about how COVID impacted our children and the lockdowns and everything. And we've talked about me growing up in London in the 80s and when the IRA bombings were going off and how we were taught to, keep ourselves safe and the drills and everything that we did. And that had a massive impact on me as a child growing up. But
Hmm.
to live in that environment where you are not safe in your own home for an entire year, let's talk about the psychological impact on those people that lived that.
And
The
it is everlasting.
Yeah, yeah. There is going to
He
be
never
people
made
that
an
still
imprint
say,
on one community. He made an
no,
imprint on entire generations.
yeah. There's still going to be people that check their locks 6 or 7 times a night before they go to sleep.
Yeah. Yep.
Because
And this creates
1985 isn't that
paranoia.
long ago, by the way.
No, it's not. And this is what people need to remember, all of the children back then are adults now. That this
Yeah,
is still an
I'm
issue
one of
from
them.
that case. Yeah.
Yeah, I was 5 years
So
old then.
yeah, this needs to be spoken about. But guys, we have come to the end of the podcast. We have reached the end of, I think, our exploration of the Ramirez case. We do advocate for the victims and the families, and like we said, victims, that word, that is a wider range than what anybody initially thought. We
Yeah,
don't condone the adoration of Ramirez. We never condoned it, and we never will condone it. And this will always be a safe place for anybody to come and sit and chill and watch videos and forget about life and take yourself away and escape your reality.
yeah,
But what we shouldn't be doing is glorifying the reason people are escaping that reality. So we want to bring it to you in a different way.
yeah,
But thank you for listening to us. Thanks for joining in. Leave us some comments. Let us know how you felt this podcast went. Click the notification bell and you will be notified every single time my best friend uploads a video. And if you subscribe, you will be helping us and we will then appear on your recommended algorithm, guys. Okay. All the social links are in the description because this amazing lady always makes sure they're there. We do hope that you enjoyed this video. She's been Gypsy. I have been Quinn. You've been amazing. We have been even better. And until the next time, take
bye
care.
bye.
Bye bye.